it's all pre-taped.
Hello, and welcome to Live from Diane's Living Room. We are not live, but we are local. And we're here today with a band of poets from Arlington County, led by Katherine Young. So welcome, Katherine. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about Written in Arlington. This is the note that you actually sent me, but it's an amazing collection. Can you talk a little bit about how it came to be?
Sure. It was a project that sort of we talked about a little bit when I was laureate, but because we lost the funding and the support position, it couldn't be done at the time. And I should say, because we have somebody important with us as a guest today, important to this anthology. This anthology, when I came to be poet laureate, I knew of exactly one poem written about Arlington, and that was Miles Davis Moore's I Love Barbie, Barbie T.
Right.
And then I had to write poems about Arlington. And so I wrote some as part of the laureateship. And that was literally, that little collection of 3 or 4 poems was the nucleus of this anthology. But of course I knew, because Miles Davis Moore had been running the Iota poetry series in the late Lyman Iota bar and grill space.
Bar Cafe, right.
Right, bar and cafe space, that that there was a huge, longing for poetry in Arlington. People came from all over the country to read at that poetry series. A number of us, including me, got our first sort of start as poets on the stage at Iota. So we had this amazing sort of body of poets and people who were interested in Arlington poetry. So I knew it was out there, but whether they had actually written any poems about Arlington, I didn't know. So anyway, when I took this project, after I finished my laureateship, I took it to the Arlington County Arts Commission and applied for an individual arts grant. And that's what gave me the money to, send out the call. And I had no idea what I was going to get. And boy, did I hit the jackpot.
Right. No, it's a terrific collection. And why don't we start with hearing from one of your poets. We're going to make time to hear from everyone. And then at the end, I'd like to talk a little bit about poetry and why it's important and what drew each of you to poetry, even though you do other things as well, fiction. And I know, Katherine, you're a translator as well, which is a whole other topic that I'd like to discuss with you another time. But so why don't you, dealer's choice, pick your poet.
Let's go with Miles Davis Moore, who wrote the mother poem of Written in Arlington, I Love Barbie T.
Okay, well, thank you, Katherine, and thank you, Diane. This poem came about, like so many people in Arlington. I commuted to work on I-395 on the bus, headed for the Pentagon. For years, there was an old, decrepit supermarket in Shirlington that had written on it in huge script, I love Barbie Taylor, T-Mac. And they tore down the supermarket to build the beautiful complex they have there now. But I felt that the sentiment needed to be preserved. So that's where the poem came from. I love Barbie Taylor.
Amazing.
It's official now. T-Mac no longer loves Barbie Taylor. Not for the commuters on I-395 who for 8,000 yesterdays read Passion and 3-foot schoolboy script. Today the bulldozers came, and romantic words became rubble to be cleared away for the ritual mating of asphalt and earth. But what of real love? Did Barbie and T's live past demolition or die long before it? Did T's love leave the wall? Was Barbie's ever there? When Barbie laid azure or emerald or onyx eyes at T's declaration, did she roll them in ecstasy or embarrassment? Did Barbie and T find out too late that love can squall and soil itself, or wither in a stranger's wink, or survive the fatal screech of cars against each other? Or did Barbie and T, a couple not perfect but comfortable with their familiarity, see their wall come down with a pang for youth so long gone, so shortly gone, hold hands for the millionth time, and wave at T Jr. walking with his first girlfriend? If the earth has an answer, the dozers drown it out. Their burring voices shake the overpass where Todd Loves Tiffany appeared last week and echo in the park, rustling the oak tree where Isaac has loved Maud 100 years.
Oh,
Thank you.
that is absolutely terrific. So Katherine, you want to pick our next reader?
Sure. Why don't we go with other interesting Arlington landmarks? And Jacqueline Jules has written a poem about a landmark that's very familiar to those of us who've spent any time in North Arlington, Ode to a Pink House.
Yes. Thank you for choosing that one. That was the one I wanted to read. And like many of us, I have gone up and down George Mason Drive many times, and there is a pink house that you can see as you go through. So, Ode to a Pink House. I see you 2 blocks away from George Mason Drive, naked in all your pink glory, beside more demure brown and blue structures. You remind me of so many choices I abandoned in the paint store, afraid of annoyed neighbors and staring traffic. Maybe it's time for me to stand on the corner, cheerfully pink like you, a 2-story monument with neon green shutters, designed to disdain safe decisions at the intersections of life.
Oh, terrific, terrific. What moved you to, aside from the fact that it's a landmark that you've seen often, what else was appealing to you?
Well, there's poetry everywhere. There's metaphors and everything. And in my work, I really like looking for the metaphors in everyday life and going past that house back and forth, thinking, you know, I'd like to be that bold. And it just seemed like a fun metaphor for what I was feeling at the time.
Right, right. So let's talk about that. Poetry in everyday life, metaphors, looking for metaphors. How about the rest of you? Does that also resonate as a source of material, and does that call out to you? And if so, under what circumstances?
Yeah, I think that once you start to see the world that way, you start to look for those things. It's very meditative for me. It helps me step out of my everyday hustle and bustle, job, family, being a mom, all that stuff, to sort of step into that. Let me look at the world through this lens of poetry. It's a wonderful thing to have. And once you start doing it, it never leaves you. So I just think it's a great thing to share with other people. So
I'm ready for another poem. Who's with me?
I think we should have Christine, because I think her poem, and I'm going to mispronounce this because I don't speak Spanish, Doña Azucena, is a very cinematic poem and a collage-like poem, I think. And it also speaks, I think, to the immigrant experience here in Arlington, so many people from so many different cultures.
Okay, take it away, Christine.
Doña Azucena. A play in food. The stage, Glebe Road. Pupusas promise pockets of home, lore, and tradition in every bite. Hot cheese, hot pork, hot beans. Grease never tasted so good. Vamos a bajonear algo, yuca frita, chicharrones, horchata, all sung in that Salvadoran lilt. San Salvador in Arlington, Santa Ana in Arlington, San Miguel in Arlington, Arrecho.
Oh, terrific. So food is another source of inspiration, memory, home, culture, heritage.
Definitely.
So I have other questions, but I want to do another reading. So Katherine, there's 2 of you left. Flip a coin. I don't know.
Well, you know, one of the important sections of the book, I think, is what I kind of, it goes in sort of thematic progression. And one of the themes that I'm really happy about is sort of women's work and everyday life. And of course, I don't mean women's work. I mean the work of knitting our lives together. And so Heather has a poem in that section called Folk Art, and I was hoping she would read that for us.
Terrific, thank
Yep.
you.
I'm happy to read this. Folk art. Because the reeds have to be soaked first, because she'll weave them in and out for hours, because the tips of the fingers exposed to water and reed dry out, the skin's oils going into the basket. What they call folk art, we call heart's blood, eagle eye, compass, and clock. In our house, because of this, we can say our mother's knowledge of making sits on the table full of fruit.
Heather, that's terrific. I had such an image of the woman at work, and it was very tactile. You really brought it to life. Is that also an experience of your heritage or Jose's heritage?
That's my mom. She's always making something, always crafting something. And she went through a long period where she made tons of baskets all the time. And I would just see her sitting and her fingers getting dry from the reeds. And she also raised 8 kids. So that sense of constantly making, and also it's a poem about making and being creative. So I wanted to capture that.
Yeah. And just the beauty again in the everyday. She's making a basket, but it's also a piece of art.
Yeah.
It holds, it has a utilitarian purpose, but it also conveys, beauty and aesthetic.
Yeah.
So Miles told us earlier that Robert Frost is his favorite. When you were all developing your craft, were there certain poets that called to you in ways that either pushed you, or not that you had to say, oh, I want to write just like Philip Larkin or whomever, but what influences did you have, if any?
May I take this one?
Of course.
Okay, yeah. My very first influence, the book that persuaded me that I wanted to be a poet, was an old Louis Untermeyer anthology called The Book of Living Verse. And it was a sort of an overview of English and American verse. It began with the ancient English and Scottish ballads and continued on. It was the copyright date was 1945. So the latest born poet in the anthology was Stephen Spender. But in the meantime, they had everybody: Chaucer, Shakespeare, Milton, William Blake, always a great favorite of mine, Yeats, another great favorite of mine, Housman, another great favorite of mine. Of course, Frost was in it, Carl Sandburg, T.S. Eliot. I mean, it was quite an overview. And that got me to thinking, wouldn't it be nice to be in a book one of those days and the name Miles David Moore was beside the name of Robert Frost and T.S. Eliot and William Blake? I mean, I know I had delusions of grandeur, and that idea, the whole idea of the canon has sort of gone by the wayside. I mean, I'm just happy to have a place at the table among fellow poets, among the poets here and the poets I got to know at IOTA.
Right. Well, yeah, it's a very, I imagine it's a very close-knit community. And IOTA, Jay Negri and I were in high school together.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 1,000 years ago. But IOTA was such a terrific crossroads, for music and poetry and just
there was no place like it. It was so wonderful. The atmosphere that Steve and Jane created. Yeah. I mean, it will never be replicated.
No,
it won't be. Terribly, yeah.
Well, and Jane's an artist herself. And
I know her art was on the walls at IOTA. It added to the ambience of the place. It was bright and unexpected and mellow and charming.
Yeah, no, all of those qualities. And I think a lot of that is unfortunately vanishing in Arlington, but that's a conversation for another day. So anyone else want to call out a favorite poet?
Yeah, I've had so many, and many of them I first found in anthologies at Central Library as a kid. Spent a lot of time there. Ran a teen poetry series with other high school students for a while. But I loved and love Gwendolyn Brooks and Langston Hughes, Ada Limon, Nikki Giovanni, Edgar Allan Poe, especially when I was really little. I loved Poe. And then again in college when I lived in Richmond.
Oh, fun.
And yeah, those are some of the top. Oh, and Alfred Tennyson. Yeah,
Oh,
more canon.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Gwendolyn Brooks, when I was at the Library of Congress 1,000 years ago, she was, they now call it the Poet Laureate, but for a long time it was called the Consultant in Poetry, and people were appointed for a year or 2-year terms, and they gave readings and they basically advocated for poetry. It's still going on today. They've had a terrific Elizabeth Bishop and James Merrill and Miles, I think Untermeyer might have been an early one as well. I'll have to go back. Unfortunately, I don't have a fact checker on this show, so I'll have to go back and check my notes. But that's terrific. So I want Katherine to read, and then I want to kind of circle back. So while Katherine is reading, I want us also to begin to think about the role of poetry today and where it's going. And I'm sure each of you has thoughts on that. So Katherine, would you like to bring us home with a poem?
Sure. I'm going to read one of the poems I wrote as Poet Laureate. I feel kind of in some ways ambivalent about these poems because these are what we call occasional poems. They are poems written to commemorate something.
Sure.
That's a really specific style of poetry, and it's not necessarily the way I write or that I characterize my writing. But I look at them as a really cool challenge. And way back, I studied Russian, but I also studied history. And so being Poet Laureate and having to write poems about Arlington that I got to go to Central Library and sit in the special collection room and go through the amazing documents that we have about Arlington's history. And even though I had lived in Arlington for probably a couple decades before this, it was really the chance to go in there and look through these things. There was this wonderful woman who lived down on Columbia Pike, and she put out a newsletter. I can't remember whether it was weekly or monthly. It was like a neighborhood newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
Have it in the collections. And even after she retired and moved to the Eastern Shore, she still put out occasional newsletters about the news on Columbia Pike. This was into the 70s and maybe even the early 80s.
Sure.
Marvelous collection of stuff. And so just going through these boxes of stuff and reading the newspaper clippings, I found what I needed for this poem, which was written for the Columbia Pike Blues Festival in 2017. And it's called Columbia Pike Blues. I also, by the way, we didn't do much about it in this section or in the discussion we've had today, but I want to say that in this anthology, there are poets with roots literally all over the world, from the Indian subcontinent, a number of places in the Indian subcontinent, from the Middle East, from Africa. And in this poem, I wanted to capture some of the roots that we see as we go along Columbia Pike. So it's called Columbia Pike Blues. What is it that we want from our roads? To cart tobacco to port, raw grain to mill, cattle to abattoir. To take us out in the morning, crossing footpaths made by others, past clay forts turned to brickworks, where a man and a woman born enslaved are buying supplies for the first brick townhouse. To take us to the river, the ferry, the bridge, the school, the store, diner, theater, botanica, iglesia, taqueria, to lead us back home. You have to sit a spell in a place to capture its full flavor, to watch from your front porch as the roads straightened and smoothed, see the couple from Barcroft throttle the bus gamely uphill, watch abandoned pastures sprout radio towers to talk with Paris, thrust up garden apartment blocks where bachelors starch clean uniforms for tomorrow's shift at the Pentagon, embrace a church, rebuild a school, bury a loved one in its soil. You have to listen to a place a long time to hear its blues. Forest to farm, hills sown with stones, Freedman's Village, Queen City paved to park cars. Streetcars falter, no longer leave the lot. Metro junctions gape empty, the line unbuilt. Even the porches are long gone now. And always the quiet padding of feet from long houses by the river as the ghosts of the land's first settlers carve out new trails up ahead.
Oh, Catherine, that's terrific. That's an oral history of Arlington. I mean, that's absolutely terrific. What a nice way to bring the reading portion to a close. So let's talk about poetry today. What's going on with poetry?
So I will say something kind of funny because it's an interesting cultural aside. I translate from Russian, and I do work with both American and Russian publishers. And in America, publishers are willing to pay me to translate prose. And they're willing to pay reasonably well to translate prose. They will not pay a cent for poetry. I have to put the poetry collection together in translation and then hand it to them and hope, please, please, will they publish it? And nobody's gonna get any money from that. In Russia, on the other hand, I'm having a lot of trouble collecting money for translating prose, but there are a couple of publishers there who are willing to pay a really nice rate for me to translate Russian poetry into English that they can then publish in Russia. And I think that says something about the relative status of poetry in society, in these two societies, which is not to say that we are not experiencing a moment in American society, because I think we are. I think we are. There are some streams coming together here from the spoken word and performance community, especially among younger poets, that are, I think, going to propel maybe the poetry that has for a little while retreated into academic towers back out into the community. That's where it should be. That's what this whole anthology is about. I mean, the idea that you have to have a PhD to understand a poem, I think a lot of people have that idea. I mean, there are poems that you do have to have a lot of sort of insider knowledge to understand. But one of the points of this collection was to make sure that everybody, I mean, it's not just what are quote unquote professional poets who are in this book, although there are many well-respected poets. There are poets who've never published before in this book. There are some high school students in this book. There are people from the Arlington Detention Center who maybe hadn't written before, and their work is in this book. And it was very much an attempt to, open the doors and invite everybody in and have poetry that reflects all the different spheres of our community, so that we have a richer sense of what poetry both is and what it can be, as a uniter and as a speaker of who we are as a very complex community.
Well, I think that certainly spoke to me when I was reading it, that it's a collection for everybody. Yeah. And Miles used the word seat at the table earlier. It invites everybody to the table to partake of this very special art form that can reach so many people in so many powerful ways, but it need not be something relegated to ivory towers and academia. How about some of the rest of you, your thoughts on contemporary poetry, or your own thoughts about poetry? Or Jacqueline, were you waving your hand?
Yeah, I wanted to say something about the need for poetry, particularly in troubled times and during we're certainly living through a time of upheaval and trouble, and people turn to poetry. We read poetry at funerals. We read poetry at special occasions. We read poetry at religious services.
Right.
Poetry, and it provides succinct emotional connection to others, and particularly in troubled times, I think that poetry has an even higher place.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right. Christine or Heather, other thoughts, or Miles?
Yeah, I was going to add to what Catherine was saying about performance and different poetry initiatives among younger poets or just creative people in general. Definitely not just spoken word poetry, but any kind of performance-based, any live reading really has taken off during my college days and grad school days, it was not unusual to go to the New York City Poetry Festival, for instance, and see it completely packed, just everybody filling up Governor's Island to hear poems. Or even, especially if there's some other kind of artist or performer there, you can attract a really big crowd. It's not unusual for musicians or comedians even to perform at the same event as poets now. And then for digital initiatives, there's so much going on, especially in Instagram poetry, but also video poems, different kinds of motion graphic or other moving image based work. You see a lot of graphic design for shareable graphics. Or, I mean, it used to be broadsides, right? Now it's a meme. A poem can become a meme.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And then there are installations. There are poems in public places. I remember Moving Words that Arlington County still hosts, but it was around during my childhood where they would print poems and put them on the buses. I have seen poems projected on buildings. I've seen poems printed and displayed in gardens. And poets will collaborate with visual artists to do installations as well, where text is still a very important part of whatever the final installation is, but it's not the only part. Yeah, so I see poetry alive in a lot of ways, maybe not as much on the traditional printed page as many of us grew up with in school, but it's still there.
Sure.
It's just changing.
Well, I would invite all of you to keep us in mind. National Poetry Month is in April. Connect with poetry and building community. I think the better. So Heather, any thoughts?
Yeah. Actually, I ran a project out in Front Royal, Virginia, where I lived for 10 years. It was called the Bathroom Poetry Project. And so that was really fun. It was very small town. And we just put out a call for poems and we posted them in bathrooms all over the downtown and people loved it. They like seeing something like that and being touched, as they're going about their everyday lives. So anything we can do in any format is great. And the video poems that are coming out are really interesting. So yeah, that's all. It's all about breaking down the barriers. It's not an elitist thing. Poetry is not elitist. It's about anyone can be included in it. I really think the moment, whatever we're having now, a lot of it has to do with diversity and the voices that are now being heard and hopefully being put to the center more. People of color, transgender, all those things are what keep us going. Those voices.
No, absolutely. And let's keep some of this energy in this conversation going. I'm absolutely serious. We have. We're making a commitment to all of you that we will promote and advocate for poetry in as many ways as we can. So any final thoughts as we draw to a close?
Yes. I want to say that we are not done with compiling poetry in Arlington, not even in the Written in Arlington project, because there is a digital component of this project called Spoken in Arlington, which at the moment is a very skeletal YouTube channel, largely with the videos of people who are in the anthology reading their own work. There are some what I would call exclusively performance pieces as part of that, but it's a small collection at the moment. It is growing and it is intended to grow. In other words, it's not intended to be static and it's not intended to just be the poets in the anthology. It's a place for digital and performance poetry as we go forward in this community. So if anybody has poems like that, please send them to me. At my website is katherineyoungpoet.com. So if you send them to me and I can get them to YouTube.
And if you want us to help you, the library to help you get the word out, put the call out, we'd be happy to do that.
Oh, I do.
Yeah, we can easily do that. Well, terrific meeting and talking with each of you this morning and hearing your terrific poems and getting excited about poetry. Katherine, we're adding this to our collection here at the library, but how can people who view this find out about where to get a copy?
Right, so you can order it from Amazon. I will say that we perhaps did not plan for the demand quite as well as we should have. So there may be a slight delay getting it into your hands. You can also order it from the local publisher, Paycock Press. That's Paycock Press. And I believe their website is through Gargoyle Magazine. But in any case, I want to say also the publisher is local, the designers were local, the artist whose painting is on the cover, Anya Getter, is local. So this is a real Arlington product, and support your local artists and publishers and poets, please.
Oh, we will absolutely do it. We didn't even talk about the artwork, which is terrific. So thank you all again, Jacqueline, Miles, Christine, Heather, Katherine. This has been delightful. So with that, I wish you each a happy holiday. I wore my candy cane tie for the occasion as we close out the year, and it was a real pleasure to have this time with you. So with that, we will say goodbye and see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Katherine.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Nice to meet you
Diane.
all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Pleasure.